Hare Krishna, dear devotees, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. I would like to warmly welcome you to the celebration of the third annual Books Are the Basis Week festival. This festival is solely dedicated to encouraging devotees in the daily reading of Srila Prabhupada's books. Today, we offer you a presentation by His Holiness Prahladananda Maharaj on the Krishna book. I hope you will relish this glorification of the Krishna book. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel as we will be releasing new content every day of the festival. Thank you. All glories to Srila Prabhupada's transcendental books.
Jaya Radha Madhava Punya Virati
Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhute Srimate Bhakti-Vedanta Swami Tinamane Namaste Saraswatam Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nirvishesha Srinivadi Paskyatyade Siddharane. I have the privilege to be able to speak about the Srila Prabhupada's summary of the 10th canto, which we know as the Krishna book. I first came across the Krishna book in 1969 in Buffalo, when Srila Prabhupada was sending around recorded tapes of his dictation for the Krishna book. And he was asking the different temples or devotees in the temple to transcribe those tapes. So I remember listening to one of the tapes, and in that tape, at least, Prabhupada said that there are different oceans. One of them is the ocean of milk, and the other is an ocean of ghee, an ocean of salt water. And they said there's even an ocean of LSD. That didn't make it into the final Krishna book. In any case, the question may be, who is the Krishna book actually meant for? The first time I saw the Krishna book, I believe it was 1970, when it was first printed. And that was a book that was printed even before the Macmillan edition of the Bhagavad-Gita. The first big book that we had to distribute was besides Srila Prabhupada's original first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam that he had printed in India. The next book was a version of the Bhagavad-Gita, which is quite small, a little version called the Blue Bhagavad-Gita. Well, it wasn't called the Blue Bhagavad-Gita, but it was blue. And it was printed by Macmillan as a condensed Bhagavad-Gita. And then later on, I believe the next book we got was Nectar of Devotion, and then the Krishna book for mass distribution. And at that particular time, this is in the early 70s, maybe 72, that we didn't really know how to distribute books that expertly. But I was in Dallas, Texas at that time, and the devotees, we used to go door to door, and we'd show the book to people, and we'd read something from the Krishna book to them to see if they would get some interest in it and buy one. At that time, we were distributing, maybe if we could distribute 3 or 4 Krishna books a night, because it was generally door to door, it was considered a very good evening for book distribution. Later on, of course, when we, on Radha Damodar, we didn't really distribute Krishna books so much because we had other books to distribute, especially the Chaitanya Charitamrita. But when we did distribute the Krishna books, a lot of time it was to the gas stations. We'd go into a gas station, fill up our tank, and then try to get them to accept a Krishna book in return for the gas. In any case, my attraction to the Krishna book was there from the beginning. I used to study it. As a matter of fact, I memorized some of the stories in the Krishna book. And when I was chanting japa, I'd go through those stories. but I asked, at that time I was living with Vishnu John Maharaj. This was in Houston, Texas, in 1971. And I asked him, do you think it's all right that when I'm chanting japa, that I'm remembering the stories of Krishna from the Krishna book? And he said, well, it's better than remembering other things. So then I decided to ask Srila Prabhupada what he thought. So I wrote a letter to Srila Prabhupada asking, is it all right when I chant japa if I'm remembering Krishna's pastimes? And Srila Prabhupada wrote me back, he said, actually, when we chant japa, we should simply listen. Not that we're artificially remembering. But if the pastimes come spontaneously, that's very good. But not that we're going to do it artificially. In any case, I continued to study the Krishna book, and when I was teaching at the Vrindavan Institute for Higher Education in the end of the 80s and beginning of the 90s, the last century, then I was teaching a methodology of how to remember the pastimes of Krishna in the Krishna book. Because there is a part of the Krishna book where Buddha was speaking to the gopis, and in that particular part, it mentions that just by remembering Krishna's pastimes, one can become eligible to go back to the spiritual world. In any case, if we look at Srila Prabhupada's introduction to the Krishna book, we can find out who the Krishna book is meant for. And I'll read part of that here. Because everyone can read the Krishna book, practically everyone, but everyone will derive a different benefit from reading the Krishna book, depending upon our particular level of consciousness. So Prabhupada writes in the introduction, the pastimes of the Lord are generally heard and relished by liberated souls. Those who are conditioned souls are interested in reading stories and material activities of some common man. Although similar narrations describing the transcendental activities of the Lord are found in Srimad Bhagavatam and other Puranas, the conditioned souls still prefer to study ordinary narrations. They are not so interested in studying the narrations, the pastimes of Lord Krishna. And yet the descriptions of the pastimes of Lord Krishna are so attractive that they are relishable for all classes of men. There are three classes of men in this world. One class consists of liberated souls, another consists of those who are trying to be liberated, and the third consists of materialistic men. Whether one is liberated, or is trying to be liberated, or is even grossly materialistic, pastimes of the Lord Krishna are worth hearing. We have to remember that, generally speaking, the devotees in the movement, they should be on the platform of trying to be liberated. This is the reason why we take initiation. Initiation means that we accept another ego. Instead of a false ego, we accept the real ego of being dasa, anadasa, the servant of the servant of the servant of Krishna. And therefore, we learn with discrimination who's on what level of spiritual attainment, and we serve them appropriately under the guidance of the topmost devotees. And we see the innocent, and we understand that the mission of the Supreme Lord in this age, as Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, is to cooperate in a transcendental family in order to inspire innocent people to take up the process of Krishna consciousness. And by our transcendental explanations of Krishna consciousness, we should be capable or become capable of defeating the atheistic propaganda that there is no God. And we can explain to people in general who the Supreme Personality of Godhead is and the process by which we can revive our relationship with Him, eternal relationship with Him. On the other hand, when we're not seeing those four categories, namely the Supreme Lord as an object of service, especially Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the Acharyas, in simple succession, so that we can come to the platform of feeling separation from Krishna and Vrindavan. And when we come to the platform of learning to actually lovingly exchange the 6 loving exchanges appropriately with different levels of devotees, in order to cooperate to spread the mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to the innocent people, and in order to defeat the atheistic propaganda, then when we act on that platform, we're acting on the liberated platform, as Prabhupada describes here. Although we may not be liberated, by acting on the liberated platform, we can derive the benefit of being liberated. At the platform of liberation, as it explains, that one can fix his mind in devotional service with concentration, because the impediment or distraction of hankering and lamentation and mental speculation by seeing others as apart from Krishna is diminished. Therefore, when we perform the activities of a liberated soul, Sadatam Kirtayanto Mam Yatantas Chadrida Vritaha Namasyantas Mam Bhaktya Nikduta Upasade. Always chanting my glories, endeavoring with great determination, bowing down before me, these great souls perpetually worship me with devotion. Then Daivi Prakriti Ashritya. Then we can experience what the internal energy of Krishna is like, what the great souls are experiencing all the time. We can get some experience of. And that experience of transcendental happiness and illumination is what inspires us to go on with our devotional service and take it more seriously. Therefore, it is said that although one may be materialistic as a devotee, because as Kapila Dev says, that there are devotees who are performing devotional service in ignorance, some of them in passion, some of them in goodness, and some are performing it transcendentally. So at the beginning, when we're interested in gross sense gratification, and we take devotional service as a mechanism to obtain those desires for sense gratification, the means for sense gratification, then we're acting on the materialistic platform, even though we may be performing sadhana bhakti. Similarly, when mental speculation is utilized to create a bigger false ego than we already have, then we're considered also a separatist, according to Kapila Dev in the Srimad Bhagavatam. On the other hand, Prabhupada also says that in that verse, Tesham Sadatam Yuktanam Bhajantam Priti Purvakam Didami Buddhi Yogam Tam Yenamam Upiyanti Te. To those who are constantly devoted to worshiping me with love, then I give them the understanding by which they can come to me. So the aim is Buddhi Yoga, transcendental devotional service, which is we practice by, as I said, acting as a Madhyama Adhikari and performing our service without expectation of return and with a clear understanding that everyone is Krishna's eternal servant. But on the other hand, even if we act in karma yoga, as Prabhupada writes to the explanation of karma yoga, that one is attached to the results of his work, but he knows that the goal is Krishna, then he's acting in karma yoga. And when he knows that the goal is Krishna, but he takes pleasure in mental speculation to understand Krishna, then he's said to be acting in jnana yoga. When he seeks Krishna completely in Krishna consciousness, then he's said to be acting in Buddhi yoga, or the complete yoga. So we should make an effort to act in Buddhi yoga. And if we do that, then the result is that our general sadhana in the morning, which consists of the 5 powerful processes, namely chanting the holy names of Krishna, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad-Gita, worshiping the deities, serving the devotees, and creating a spiritual atmosphere, both in the temple and outside by preaching, then the result is that even a neophyte, if he concentrates his mind upon these activities, can experience transcendental ecstasy or bhava. that one can actually get the mercy of Krishna, and Krishna will appear within one's consciousness. One will be able to experience what actually Krishna consciousness is. Therefore, even if we're materialists, we shouldn't be materialists, but sometimes we may read the Krishna book with a material mentality. But we should be acting at least trying to act on the liberated platform so that we can actually experience what liberation is by reading the Krishna book. And for those who are transcendentalists already situated in the transcendental platform, and Prabhupada describes what their experience is. So Prabhupada goes on to write, it is essential for persons who are actually liberated to hear about the pastimes of Krishna. That is a supreme religious subject for one in the liberated state. Also, if persons who are trying to be liberated hear such narrations as the Bhagavad-Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, then their path to liberation becomes very clear. Bhagavad-Gita is a preliminary study of Srimad Bhagavatam. By studying the Gita, one becomes fully conscious of the position of Lord Krishna. And when he is situated at the lotus feet of Krishna, he understands the narrations of Krishna as described in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Lord Chaitanya has therefore advised his followers, their business is to propagate Krishna Katha. In other words, Bhagavad Gita is meant to convince us that Krishna is actually the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and that there's nothing outside of Krishna and Krishna's energies. And all of Krishna's energies are non-different from him. And when we become convinced about that, then naturally the tendency is to surrender to Krishna. But to become convinced about that, we have to learn the science of Krishna consciousness and practice it to the best of our ability, because the science of Krishna consciousness is meant to help us learn how to hear transcendental message, because our capacity to do so in the conditioned state is rather limited. That generally we take the Krishna consciousness at the beginning, as we know, to end suffering, like Gajendra. And therefore, we're not very much interested in topics that concern surrender, especially of the things we're attached to. We'd rather not hear about those things. We'd rather become somehow or another free from our miseries. And then when we learn that our miseries are caused by Trividam Narakasya Dwaram Nashitam Atmanaha Kama Krodha Tata Lobhas Tasman Etam Triyam Jajet. There are three gates to hell, namely lust, anger, and greed. Every sane man should become free from these three gates because they lead to the degradation of the self. Etan Vimukta Kandya Kamodro or Tribir Nara Achra Yatmana Shayas Toyati Brangit. That anyone who becomes free from these gates performs activities which are conducive to self-realization, and thus gradually attains the supreme goal. So when we learn about the fact that our real problem is unrestrained lust, anger, and greed, which is possible to get that intelligence by especially chanting Hare Krishna, that we can understand that by the superior taste of chanting Hare Krishna, that there's another state of consciousness where we don't have to focus our mind 24 hours a day of running after the opposite sex and getting intoxicated. That there's another state where I can actually feel much better and more peaceful without those unnecessary distractions. And then, of course, when one is more peaceful, one can hear better, one learns about how our endeavors in the material world to find peace and happiness due to utilizing industrialization and technology has simply complicated our lives and taken away the real source of material happiness, which comes from clean air, fresh water, fresh food, nice prasadam, nice relationships with others. In other words, a material atmosphere which is also imbued with a knowledge of its relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead and a sane economic system based upon cow protection and bull protection, rather than a system which is meant to more or less cause unnecessary complications to get basically what we need is food. So one on that platform, one is still desirous of getting some material remuneration from chanting, just as in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, Gop Kumar is going from one place in the universe to the next, but he's utilizing the Gopal mantra in order to do so. And so he goes to higher and higher levels of material existence, and finally he starts going to higher levels of transcendental knowledge coming from places such as Jnana Loka, hearing from the four Kumaras. And finally he goes to Brahma Loka and then liberation, going through the different coverings of the universe. But he's still not satisfied, because ultimately what he's actually looking for is Krishna. And when he realizes that actually what he's looking for is Krishna, then he focuses his mind on Krishna completely and is not distracted by other types of allurements, either in the material world or even in the spiritual world. So therefore, while we're reading the Krishna book or studying the Krishna book, we should become aware of what is my motivation for studying the Krishna book, especially for the devotees who understand Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then at least we should read it in the same consciousness that Srila Prabhupada has explained, that we should study the Bhagavad-Gita. In the beginning of the Bhagavad-Gita, Srila Prabhupada, in the introduction, Prabhupada explains that he was speaking to one lady who asked him to give him some recommendation for a Bhagavad-Gita that she could read in English. And Prabhupada made the comment that, especially in America, that as far as he was conscious, that there was no Bhagavad-Gita that Srila Prabhupada could actually recommend, due to the fact that every commentator had put in his own understandings of Bhagavad-Gita, apart from actually the message that Krishna was giving. Therefore, Prabhupada found the need to give another presentation of the Bhagavad-Gita, following in the Acharya disciple succession. And then Prabhupada explains that in Krishna in the Bhagavad-Gita presents himself as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then we can understand, or we might be able to accept Krishna, what he's saying is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, if we accept the authority of Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, and Sankaracharya, who support Krishna when he says that he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And even in books such as the Brahma Samhita and the Bhagavad Purana, Krishna is also proclaimed as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now, most of us growing up in the Western world, or even in other parts of the world, in current society, due to the faithlessness of the leaders in society, it's very hard for us to accept personalities such as Ramanujacharya or even Madhvacharya, and what to speak of Sankaracharya. Or if we've not studied the Brahma Samhita and the Srimad Bhagavatam thoroughly enough, we may not be aware of Krishna completely as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We may theoretically, therefore Prabhupada said that at least preliminarily, before we study books such as the Bhagavad-Gita, we should at least theoretically accept that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Such an acceptance of Krishna, at least theoretically, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is called submission. And with such a submissive spirit, we can begin to understand the Bhagavad-Gita And what to speak of the Krishna book, which is far beyond the transcendental realizations that Bhagavad-Gita offers us. Of course, Bhagavad-Gita ultimately offers us everything. It offers us that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And if we understand that, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad-Gita, Yomam evam samudo janati purushottama sasarvavid bhajantemam sarabhavena bharata. That Yomam evam asamudo, that anyone who understands me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead without doubting is said to be the knower of everything, and therefore he engages in himself in full devotional service without any doubt. Iti guyatama shastram idam yuktva mayanaga etam bhutva buddhimatsya krita krita srivarata. That this is the most confidential part of all the Vedic literature, that anyone who knows this becomes wise, and his endeavors will know perfection. So Bhagavad Gita is certainly sufficient to learn how to perform devotional service, and therefore get the mercy of Krishna, both within the heart and in his original incarnations and his original, his current avatar is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and which will help us come to the platform of feeling separation from Krishna and Vrindavan, and therefore get to know Krishna intimately. Still, Krishna is revealing himself as he is, as he came 5,000 years ago in his books, such as the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Krishna book presented by Srila Prabhupada. As it says in the first chapter, Prabhupada's commentary in the Krishna book in the first chapter, that unless Krishna had come, as the demigods pray, then we would not know who God is. We'd simply speculate on some impersonal level. God may be like this or like that, but such speculation is useless. Therefore, Krishna personally comes and shows us who he is, what his activities are. Of course, we have to become qualified in order to actually understand Krishna in truth. Tatvataha, janma karma chame divyam evam yoveti tatvataha. And of course, that to understand Krishna in truth will help us become liberated, but that's only possible by bhakti. Bhakti mam abhijananti yavan yaschasmi tatvataha. Only by performing our activities with bhakti can we actually enter into the mysteries of Krishna's understanding, as found in books such as the Krishna book. In any case, a liberated soul is relishing the Krishna book, as probably explained later on. And we ourselves are trying to come to the platform of getting some of Prabhupada and Krishna's mercy so we can experience something that's actually there already, but we're simply covered over. And therefore, unless they give us their mercy, we will not be able to experience it. The other thing is that we should at least theoretically accept Srila Prabhupada as he actually is, or as he tells us he is. As Srila Prabhupada was, according to Srila Prabhupada himself, was a Nitya Siddha Shakta avatar, Shaktavesha avatar. That he's a Charya in our disciple succession, a Sampradaya Acharya. That at no time in his life did he ever forget Krishna. And when he was writing his books, at any time, whatever he was writing, was being directly dictated by Krishna. One time, Ramaswar Prabhu was with Prabhupada when Prabhupada was being interviewed by one man, one reporter, and the reporter was wondering that how did Prabhupada get the inspiration for different things that he was doing? Was Krishna actually telling him directly? And Ramaswar Prabhu said that our spiritual master, he gets intelligence from Krishna. And Prabhupada interrupted and said, no, Krishna talks to me directly. Unless we accept Prabhupada
as a direct instrument for Krishna, as Krishna says in Bhagavad-Gita, that Tasmadi Tishti Sholava Svajitapa Shatram Bhukshva Rajan Smidan Mayavitaniyatam Purvameva Nimitram Matram Bhavasava Sachin. Just get up and prepare to fight, and after conquering your enemies, you'll enjoy a flourishing kingdom. They're already put to death by my arrangement. You of Savasachi can be but an instrument in the fight. So unless we accept Srila Prabhupada as the perfect instrument of Krishna, at least theoretically, then there's no reason to read his books, because we'll always be doubtful what's true and what's untrue, what's perfect and what's imperfect. So at least theoretically, we should accept Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And in that submissive spirit, and in the submissive spirit, accepting Srila Prabhupada as the perfect Sampradaya Acharya, transmitting the message of Krishna perfectly, then in that submissive spirit, we'll be able to enter into the mysteries of the Krishna book. Now, that doesn't mean that every single word is grammatically correct, as we know from the Srimad Bhagavatam. That's not necessarily true. As Prabhupada explained, the perfection of the Acharya is not that he doesn't forget verses, or from the mundane point of view, he makes a mistake. Perfection of the Acharya is that he's a perfect instrument for Krishna. From a mundane point of view, he may have made mistakes, but actually there was no mistake, because Krishna wants to present himself as the Acharya to different people under different circumstances. And therefore, Prabhupada would present himself appropriately in order to attract people to become Krishna conscious. Even Krishna does that sometimes, as we find out in the Krishna book, that Krishna sometimes acts as seemingly an ordinary person. When Shalva was fighting against Krishna, then at one point, Shalva came seemingly with Krishna's father, Vasudeva. And before that, a man came and told Krishna that, unfortunately, Shalva has kidnapped your father. And Shalva came with Vasudeva and then cut off Vasudeva's head and then left in his airplane. So momentarily, it seemed that Krishna was bewildered. But then he realized, seemingly, that Shalva had killed a false Vasudeva, that his father was not killed, that Balaram was not negligent in protecting him, etc., etc. So this is all for Krishna's pastimes. Many times Krishna acts like that. Even when Krishna was fighting against in his form of Varaha, fighting against Hiranyaksha, seemingly Hiranyaksha had hit Varaha and his club fell out of his hands. And all the demigods were quite aghast. How is this possible? And of course, Lord Varaha eventually cut off the head of Hiranyaksha. But this makes everything Krishna's pastimes more exciting. Shalva even hit the Saranga bow out of Krishna's hand, but at the end, Shalva had his head and arm cut off also. When Krishna and when the cowherd boys entered into the mouth of Aghasura, Krishna was supposedly astounded and struck with wonder, wondering what to do, seeing the wonderful actions of his material energy. But actually, Krishna is never bewildered. He's everywhere. How can he be bewildered? But unless he acted like that, the pastimes would be they become more interesting when Krishna acts sometimes as seemingly an ordinary personality. Similarly, we should understand that a perfect devotee of Krishna, perfect instrument for spreading Krishna consciousness, like Srila Prabhupada, is always under the Daivi Prakriti, and everything he does is divine. With that submissive spirit, we can read his books, especially Krishna books.
So Prabhupada goes on to explain, and Prabhupada, of course, sometimes he goes over the same philosophy in different ways in order to give us a perspective on it. So Prabhupada goes on to say, Krishna Katha means narrations about Lord Krishna. There are two Krishna Kathas, narrations spoken by Krishna and narrations spoken about Krishna. The Bhagavad-Gita is the narration or the philosophy on the science of God, spoken by Krishna himself. Srimad Bhagavatam is the narration about the activities and transcendental pastimes of Krishna. Both are Krishna Katha. It is the order of Lord Chaitanya that Krishna Katha should be spread all over the world. Because if the conditioned souls suffering under the pangs of material existence take to Krishna Katha, then their path of liberation will be open and clear. The purpose of presenting this book is primarily to induce people to understand Krishna or Krishna Katha, because thereby they can become free from material bondage. And then Prabhupada goes on to write, this Krishna Katha will be very much appealing to the most materialistic persons because Krishna's pastimes with the gopis, cowherd girls, are exactly like the loving affairs between young girls and boys within this material world. Actually, the sex feeling found in human society is not unnatural because the same sex feeling is there in the original personality of Godhead. The pleasure potency is called Srimati Radharani. The attraction of loving affairs on the basis of sex feeling is the original feature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And we, the conditioned souls, being part and parcel of the Supreme, have such feelings also, but they're experienced within a perverted, minute condition. Therefore, when those who are after sex life in this material world hear about Krishna's pastimes with the gopis, they will relish transcendental pleasure, although it appears to be materialistic. The advantage will be that they will gradually be elevated to the spiritual platform. In the Bhagavatam, it is stated that if one hears the pastimes of Lord Krishna with the gopis from authorities with submission, then he will be promoted to the platform of transcendent loving service to the Lord. The material disease of lust within his heart will be completely vanquished. In other words, such hearing will counteract material sex life. This book, which is filled with Krishna Katha, will thus appeal equally to the liberated souls and to persons who are trying to be liberated, as well as to the gross conditioned materialists. According to the statement of Maharaj Parikshit, who heard from Krishna about Shukadeva Goswami, Krishna Katha is equally applicable to every human being, whatever condition of life he is in. The only thing is, it probably goes on to write, that those who are pashugnat, those who are killing animals or killing themselves, they won't be able to understand Krishna's pastimes. They won't be very much attracted to Krishna Katha. So when we talk about the gross conditioned materialists, we're really referring to people who are somewhat regulated in their lives, especially in eating, sleeping, work, and recreation or propagation, reproduction. We're somewhat following the regular principles of life, or not materialists who become envious of the Supreme Personality of Godhead or his representatives, who can at least accept Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead theoretically and accept Prabhupada as his direct representative. For instance, in the pastimes of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, such gross materialists may even be compared to the father and uncle of Raghunath Das Goswami, who was Govardhan Mujabdara and Haranya Majudara, who were tax collectors, but very pious. Still, they were materialists. They were more interested in comfortable household life than they were in transcendental life. So such persons can be benefited from hearing Krishna Katha. They'll be attracted to hearing it. Others who are not following the regular principles, especially killing animals or killing themselves by sinful activities, they will not be very much attracted to hearing about Krishna Katha. Therefore, Krishna Katha is can give everyone great opportunity to, especially as presented by Srila Prabhupada, who gives many explanations in the Krishna book concerning how we can understand the Krishna's pastimes properly. That there is enough philosophy that Prabhupada gives us to have a clear conception that Krishna's pastimes are transcendental. And that if we hear them with the right spirit, with the right understanding, then we'll benefit from them. Now, the first 9 cantos of the Srimad Bhagavatam are specifically meant to convince us that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead and how to act following the example of great personalities in the past, how to act in our present existence in order to realize Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, how to perform devotional service with knowledge, especially detachment. Therefore, it's expected by the time we get to the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam that we've already accepted Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead and that we're going to meditate upon him in the 10th canto. In the Bhagavad-Gita, Prabhupada explains in the verse, Yesham antikatam papam, jananam punya karmanam, hedvan vamo niramuktva, bhajante mam drida vrataha. Those who have acted piously in this life and in previous lives, who are free from the reactions of sinful activities, and are free from the dualities, can engage themselves in my service with determination. And therefore, Prabhupada gives the explanation of who are those pashugnats. He says those who are sinful, those who are atheistic, those who are deceitful, and those who are foolish, sinful, atheistic, and deceitful. They cannot really become attracted to the path of spiritual understanding. So that those are the 4 kinds of diskretinas. Those who are mudhas, who are ignorant, those who are naradamas, the lowest among men, those who are mayaprita-gyanas, whose knowledge has been stolen by illusion, and those who are asram bhavam ashrityas, those who are thinking themselves to be liberated, but actually they defy the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and therefore their hopes for liberation, their fruitive activities, and the culture of knowledge are always defeated. Therefore, Prabhupada explains the path of gradual elevation to the transcendental path. And he says the beginning is to follow religious principles. Especially religious principles means to become merciful, austere, truthful, and clean by giving up illicit sex, intoxication, meat eating, and gambling. And then to come to the platform of work acting piously in this world, protecting the cows, protecting the bulls, protecting Mother Earth, engaging in the sacrifice, participating in the sacrifice, especially in this age, of supporting the Sankirtan movement. So these are people who are pious. And by pious activities, one gets the benediction of becoming attracted to Krishna Katha, and therefore one can gradually conquer sinful reactions. One can understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead enough to understand that there's no perfect happiness in the material world, and therefore one learns tolerance in the face of adversity and can go on with their pious activities in Krishna consciousness. Then one can actually accept factual devotional service, free from hankering, lamentation, free from mental speculation that causes us to see other living entities as apart from Krishna, accept real devotional service, and rise to the pure knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then he can meditate in trance upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Krishna book, for the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, is specifically meant for those who come to the platform of rising to the where they know Krishna in truth through the first 9 cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam, and now they're prepared to meditate, or they're already meditating in trance upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam is specifically meant for those who are feeling separation from Krishna and therefore associate with him in that feelings. Now, we may not be on that platform. In fact, it's not so common to be on that platform. Still, we can follow the footsteps of our acharyas and try to concentrate our minds upon the words in books such as the Krishna book, and therefore experience transcendental ecstasy by concentrating our minds upon Krishna. So I'll give one brief example. For instance, in the 34th chapter of the Krishna book, which I'll just recite by memory, some of the first part of it. And then I'll go into the specific example that I want to show. The gopis of Vrindavan were so attached to Krishna that they were not satisfied with the rasa dance at night. They wanted to associate with him and enjoy his company during the daytime also. When Krishna went to the forest with his cowherd boys and the cows, the gopis could not physically take part, but their hearts went with him. And because their hearts went with him, they were able to enjoy his company through strong feelings of separation. To acquire the strong feeling of separation is the teachings of Lord Chaitanya and its direct disciplic succession of Goswamis. When we're not in physical association with Krishna, we can also associate with him through strong feelings of separation. Krishna's name, his form, his quality, his pastimes are all identical with him. There are 9 different kinds of devotional service, and devotional service to Krishna and feelings of separation elevates the devotee to the highest devotional perfection, to the level of the gopis. As stated in the prayers of Srinivasacharya to the 6 Goswamis, that they gave up the princely status of life and government service and went to Vrindavan, where they lived like ordinary mendicants begging from door to door. But they were so much enriched with the gopis' feelings of separation that they enjoyed transcendental pleasure at every moment. Similarly, when Lord Chaitanya was at Jagannath Puri, he was in the role of Srimati Radharani, feeling the separation of Krishna. Those who are in the Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya, Madhva Brahma Gaudiya Sampradaya, should always feel the separation of Krishna. Worship his transcendental name, discuss his transcendental form, his teachings. The spiritual masters should elevate their followers to the highest devotional perfection. Feeling constant separation from Krishna while engaged in devotional service is the perfection of Krishna consciousness. So then the pastimes go on, which I'm just going to take one of the pastimes. It's a very simple one of them. When Krishna was seen walking on the bank of the Jamuna, he was seen nicely decorated with tilak on his forehead, and he was garlanded with different kinds of forest flowers, and his body was smeared with pulp of sandalwood and tulsi leaves. The bumblebees became mad at the treasure and sweetness of the atmosphere, and being pleased by the humming sound of the bees, Krishna began to blow upon his flute. And the combined sounds became so sweet to hear that the aquatic birds, like the cranes, the ducks, and the swans, stopped swimming and flying and became stunned. And then they closed their eyes and enter into a trance meditation in worship of Krishna. Just to briefly go over the last paragraph in that particular chapter. Such pastimes of Krishna were remembered by the gopis during his absence from Vrindavan. They give us some idea of how attractive Krishna is, not only to human beings, but also to both animate and inanimate objects. In Vrindavan, the trees, the plants, the rivers, the deer, animals such as the deer and the cows, everyone and everything is attracted to Krishna. That is the perfect description of Krishna's all-attractiveness. The example of the gopis is very instructive to us for trying to become absorbed in Krishna consciousness. Everyone has a tendency to love Krishna, that Krishna should be the object of love is the central point of Krishna consciousness. By constantly chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, remembering Krishna's pastimes, everyone can be fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness and thus make his life sublime and fruitful. So going back to that little part of the pastime I was telling, when Krishna was seen walking in the bank of the Jamuna, so our business is to use our imagination in Krishna's service, as we're supposed to use our body and our minds. So our minds have a tendency to create images. The images in the Krishna book or in any of Prabhupada's books, they're transcendental. They're deities. As we hear from our Goswamis, that there are different kinds of deities made out of wood, made out of jewels, made out of stone. Is also the deity within the mind. So our business when we read Krishna book is to create the deity within our mind. As that Brahmin in the Nectar of Devotion didn't have the means of worshiping the temple deity, therefore he daily meditated upon serving the deity within his mind. So when we think about Krishna within our minds, Krishna is very kind. According to our level of sincerity and our spiritual attainment, Krishna will personally appear within our mind, along with his name, form, quality, and pastimes, and his associates, depending upon our sincerity and our ability due to our faith, devotional activities, etc., and mercy coming from Krishna. So when we hear that Krishna is walking on the bank of the Jamuna, then we should try to think about what Krishna looks like. We should see Krishna with his blackish form, with his yellow dhoti, his lotus-petaled eyes. As much as we can see Krishna, we should see him within our minds, if we can. If we can't, at least we should try to remember verses from Brahma Samhita, Venum Kwanantam Aravindam Dalayataksha, that describe Krishna. That's the Krishna who's walking in the bank of the Jamuna. And if we're fortunate enough, then we should see Krishna within our mind, walking on the bank of the Jamuna. We should see the Jamuna, or the blackish waters, lotus flowers on the water, swans on the water, cranes on the water, birds flying above the water, Krishna with his all attractive features. And here it's described a little bit about Krishna's attractive features, such as he has tilak on his forehead. And he's garlanded with different kinds of forest flowers, such as tulsi leaf, such as yellow flowers and blue flowers, red flowers. So we should see those flowers within our minds. Now, we're not creating those flowers. We have no ability to create anything. Krishna's, by his mercy, by our faithfulness and our desire, Krishna is appearing within our minds in that particular form, to reciprocate with our desire to serve him in that way. Then we should also going to faithfully accept that Krishna has his body smeared with the tulsi leaves and with sandalwood paste. And the bumblebees, we should hear the sound of the bumblebees. We should hear them buzzing around Krishna's garland, around Krishna's transcendental body. We should actually hear them with our ears, with our mental ear, with our spiritual ears, because that's actually what we'll hear it with. Then we should also, as the bumblebees become mad after the transcendental sweetness of the atmosphere, then we should also try to smell these flowers. We should also try and smell Krishna's body. We should make it an act of listening. It's meant to utilize all our senses, transcendental senses, in this experience. Then it becomes a transcendental experience for us, a relishable experience. And the more we meditate upon this, the more sincerity we show to Krishna, the more he decides to give us his mercy, the more we'll be able to experience what's being said in these words, because they're all non-different from reality. Then we can see Krishna picking up his flute, putting it to his lotus mouth, and playing on harmony and with the bees humming. And the sound they're producing creates such a sweet atmosphere that the swans, the ducks, the cranes, they stop swimming and flying, and then they close their eyes and enter into a trance and meditation of Krishna. So this is a great opportunity for us to experience the sweetness and the transcendental atmosphere of the spiritual world as Krishna is manifesting itself through Srila Prabhupada and these words in the Krishna book. So it's a great opportunity. If we take advantage of it, then we can enjoy transcendental pleasure at every moment, as the Goswamis did, as the Gopis did. We have an equal opportunity as they do if we take this process seriously. I'll say one more thing. When I first started to study the Krishna book, there used to be what was called the Krishna bowl. So in the Krishna bowl, there was different temples in America specifically, because it was difficult to contact the few temples that were in other places besides America. But there was transcendental competition between different temples in America, where someone would ask questions from the Krishna book, and the different temples would answer it. So I was actually the temple president of Austin, Texas at that time, but I was invited to join with the Dallas, Texas devotees to compete in the World Champion Krishna Bowl in Los Angeles. So we got into a vehicle. It's called a maxi van. And we traveled to 2 days from Texas to LA to compete in the Krishna Bowl. And during that time, there was one devotee who spent the whole 2 days of traveling studying the Krishna book. And I also studied the Krishna book. So when we got there, I still remember the questions that I answered correctly. What they did is they have a timer. They'd ask the question. There would be one team on one side and another team on the other side, and you push the button. So you answer, whoever pushed the button first could give the answer. And if you gave the right answer, you got credit. If you gave the wrong answer, the other team would take their time and come up with the answer. So they ask questions such as, when Krishna came out to give the Aborigine lady some grains in his hand, and she gave him some fruit, what did she see in her basket afterwards? So I pushed the button and said, jewels. And he said, right. So we got some credit. So anyhow, at the end, I was on the winning team, the Krishna Bowl. Now, we were very proud. We were the world champions at that time. Not much competition for the Krishna Bowl. But then they told Prabhupada about it, and Prabhupada was not very happy with it. He said, this is not the way you approach the Krishna Bowl. It's not some kind of contest. We have to approach it with great reverence and with the proper attitude. Not as that some game we're playing, nor is it some means to show off our memory or whatever else. It's an opportunity to enter more deeply into Krishna consciousness. That's why it's being presented. And if we do that, then we'll appreciate the mercy that Krishna is giving us, the mercy that Prabhupada is giving us. Even though we may not be so elevated, still they're giving us access to themselves personally through the books that Prabhupada has written and through the movement that Prabhupada has created, so that we can live in the association of devotees, learn from different devotees their realizations about these books, and cooperate with each other to give that same mercy to others, so they can also revive their eternal relation with Krishna. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Krishna book ki jai, or Premanande.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Ram